So the first thing to discuss here is the whole system of catchment planning, and this is an adaptation from a really nice and clear diagram from New Zealand Beef and Lamb, where it in these green boxes, what they talked about, and rightly so, are the steps, good steps. First step is, why are we coming together? Like, it's really important as a catchment group to understand that you have a purpose, and I've just added a couple of things here. Do you need to act, and are you sort of ready to act? Have you got resourcing and governance sort of connected in there as well? The second step is understanding what great stuff is already happening. There's so many partners and people and science and action already going on, and it's really important to celebrate those successes from the past, what our forebears have done, what people are doing right now. Really important. Step 3, and again rightly so, setting a vision. What's a vision? What does the future state look like? What is good? What do we want as a community? I think this is just such a crucial step in the process. Now, what's been added by me, is this catchment planning step really into this whole system. So just adding a little bit of further investigation and good catchment planning, and as well as monitoring and evaluation. What we should do here really is, we've got our vision, so we really want to understand the catchment at this stage. What are our contexts, our risks, and our opportunities? What's really going on across partnerships, but also biophysically, particularly if you're after a biological or water quality outcome. Crucial, I guess, to any planning session is setting SMART goals. So understanding how far we can get as well is crucial. So SMART is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So the really important part of working at landscape scale is prioritization. It's probably, for me, beyond all the really important human aspects of catchment planning, from a science or planning point of view, prioritization is probably the most important thing to do. So we can't do everything everywhere. We just can't afford it. It'll take too long. We've got to really work on the things that shift the dial the most. So we want to prioritize our actions and understand our implementation methods. Very, very important. So where are we going to do it? When is it important? And what are we going to do? So that needs some decision support tools, some good understanding of the risk areas in a catchment and what we can do about it, and the costs and implementation methods with people as well. And then that takes us to the beef and lamb sort of step 4. So just, what actions are we going to take? And again, this really needs to be linked to that prioritization. Crucially, and part of the planning process, is monitoring and evaluation. So this can happen throughout, but part of this catchment planning is really setting up how we're going to measure things across time. And what we measure, we do. So in our case, if we wanted to really get some actions going that make a difference to our values, our vision, and our objectives, we have to set that up right from the beginning. And this takes us all the way to the last step in the beef and lamb system, which is how we tell our story. It's crucial, isn't it? Like, to be able to present how this whole thing has been working and who we've been doing it with and how, and the successes. Build some momentum and, drive more engagement with the community and the partners that you're with. So let's have a look at those steps again. Pretty straightforward, really. As we're breaking it down. So step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then with this catchment planning, monitoring, and evaluation stuck in the middle. Now let's have a look at this from if we were going to use a tool to have a look at where we're at, or a kind of vision for all these sorts of things. I just like to use a logic model, and I'll zoom out a little bit so we can see it in its entirety. So this looks at that same system really, and just chunks it up into 5 key steps. So this is a template that someone might use. For example, we want to understand the context and state, set our vision with the community, understand what goals we have based on that context and state and what we're trying to achieve overall and how we're going to get there. Then straight into actions and prioritization, and there's a bunch of things we could break that down into, and I'll show you a more detailed version of this in a second. And then if we're going to meet our objectives, what are the outcomes? What is it that we expect to happen over what sort of time frame? What are the measures and targets that we have? and how we're going to evaluate whether we've got there. So that's a basic kind of logic model, if you like, of how we might think about catchment planning. And this will be provided as well below. So if we look at this, I'll zoom in. This is very detailed. This is another exact same thing. It's just broken down into more components. So this is a more detailed logic model with an example built in. So let's go all the way to the start here, zoom in. So what I like to call preconditions to catchment planning. So we really need to understand the state and what's our drivers, what's our need. So why are we coming together? What's the state of our people and our projects that are already happening? What's happened before? And understand the state from a planning point of view. Really important. You know, what's going on there for a regional policy point of view. Where's the funding going? And additional to that is understanding the biophysical and geophysical state. So this is really important, I think, to enable us to come up with these other bits. So what's our vision for the future? And what are our objectives? And this whole logic model here is broken down into one objective. All of these things add up to this freshwater ecosystem objective. However, you could have several objectives. You could have 5, you could have 10 even. I wouldn't recommend it, but you know, 2, 3, 5 maybe, totally realistic. And having some objectives around people would make a lot of sense, as well as biophysical outcomes as well. So in this example, we've got a freshwater ecosystem example with the SMART objective being to improve healthy freshwater ecosystems, native habitat and fish abundance. So back to 1980 levels in the upper catchment by 2040. Of course, you want to define what that upper catchment is and a whole bunch of definition there around what these mean. So that's where you break it down just a little bit further. So we've got a whole bunch of risks, drivers and specifics. So we've got some risks around, you know, fish passage. We've got blockages to fish and cutting off habitat. There's some probably habitat quality challenges. There's some challenges around values, you know, river conveyance or flooding or holding onto water as well, water availability for irrigation and those sorts of things. Understanding whether moving back to 1980 is possible, crucial probably back at the start with the state. And then it's into things like water quality, pests, and importantly, landowner and community and partner engagement. So those are, if we don't have those are a big risk, right? Now, working our way up actually, so the opportunities really with landowners is to build understanding across landowners and understand the values that they have, the negativities, the positivities, I suppose, as well around the catchment. The opportunities to work with experts and work with large council programs which may have funding or other activities which really align with your activities. So let's just review that again from a catchment planning point of view. Our vision with the community, we're really focusing on objectives and then we're breaking those down initially to understand the risks, the drivers and the opportunities. So from this, we can really start to say, well, what is it then, if we want to meet that objective, do we need to do? And if we go into these implementation boxes, now I've broken this down into 3 sections. Most of the time in a catchment planning sense, you'll have some information gaps. You may not have to do anything about it, but I think it's a really important one to identify what the information gaps are and information actions. Then, of course, we talked about prioritization above and engagement, crucial to get people alongside you. Earlier the better. And then actions, so stuff happening on the ground and telling a story. So that's that beef and lamb telling a story as well. I won't go into each of these in detail, of course, but if you think about it, these are really just understanding the state of that specific driver. And then it's looking at which things that we need to prioritize. So in this case, if we look at fish passage back here, then we're looking at which barriers block the most habitat. It makes sense, right? If you can unblock one or create fish passage in an area that gives you 10 more kilometers of stream versus one that only gives you 30 meters more stream, then the 10Ks are going to be the highest priority, right? Much bigger return on investment. Again, we want to really set appropriate targets. So that's an action already. We want to set appropriate targets over different time frames. We want to do some initial monitoring. We want to do that first. So we want to know how far we're going to take this specific action. Then we want to do some implementation. We've got to spend some money, do some work, get some things happening on ground. Otherwise, it doesn't make any change. And finally, of course, with looking at actions and tell a story, we want to communicate the benefits of this remediation. I won't go into all of these, but these are available in the link below. So the last thing really is, what measures, targets do we have for their objective? So these have got to be aligned to those drivers that we talked about. What were the risks and opportunities, and how have we changed them? So if you just look at some of that, measures that we might want. So fish habitat has increased by 20%. So you want to set an appropriate target for that based on your knowledge of fish passage or blockages in the catchment. Is 20% good? Can it be 30%? Should it be 5%? So set that at an appropriate level. For example, again, 5 years fish abundance has increased in the catchment, so that's just more logic. As we're monitoring for fish in the catchment and we're enhancing habitat, then surely fish abundance will also enhance. And then being able to tell the story again. So highlight the partners and the landowners involved in what they've done to drive this. So you can go through all of these little, break down every little thing. So everything should add up from the right hand side back to the left. So we're measuring all these things. Does it highlight how good our actions are? Do our actions, were they prioritized to shift the dial the most? Were they based on really good information? Did we really make the most of our opportunities? And are we addressing the risks, drivers, and the specifics here as well? And finally, did all of these things add up back to our meeting our objective? And that's really how it should work. And then, of course, we'll have a bunch of these SMART objectives, and they should all add up to this vision. So it all starts there. I would say have a crack at looking at these and see if you can work something out for yourself. Use this as an example, and yeah, would love any feedback. Thank you.